that now. So hopefully you can see my slides okay and you can hear me okay. But please give me a shout if not. Um, Thanks very much for the kind invitation to join you tonight. Apologies for having to do it remotely due to our commitments earlier on today in Edinburgh. Would have liked to have been with you, particularly if you're heading to the pub afterwards. Sorry to have missed that, and great to see so many of you both in the room and online. Um, Looking forward to hearing your thoughts and being part of the conversation later on and hearing the other two speakers as well. Um, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what community transport is, first of all, to kind of set the scene, give you a bit of a definition for what our sector is, um, talk you through ourselves at the Community Transport Association, what we do, and how we can help community groups and operators, and then finally talk about community transport's role in community-led climate action. Um, I've been at CTA for just over 3 years now as our Scotland director, and climate action has been a real huge focus of what we've done over those 3 years and will continue to be so over the next period as well. So I'm really pleased to be part of this conversation. So first things first, what is community transport? Apologies if some of you are already familiar with the sector, and if this isn't new to you. But we often get asked this question even from those who are already kind of deeply engaged in the sector, I suppose, because the sector has such massive diversity and flexibility in terms of what it does deliver and what it can deliver for different communities. We define community transport quite broadly as community solutions to unmet transport needs. The common denominators are that the local charity, community group, or social enterprise delivering the transport project or service is community owned and led in some way. It's delivering the service on a non-profit basis, and it's delivering it for a social purpose. So there's not an economic or commercial purpose behind it. Um, and really, those are the key common denominators. Other than that, we see huge diversity across what our members deliver. We don't define the sector in terms of modes or specific approaches or even models. It's all about being always for a social purpose, never for a profit, and being founded on community ownership at the heart. Um, the sector is also defined by its three kind of key values as part of its mission. So historically, the sector was very much a response to inaccessibility. Um, so lots of community transport services historically were about ensuring that older people and disabled people in particular had the same freedom and independence and right to be able to travel and move around as the rest of the population. Inclusion being an important value for the sector as well. But increasingly over the last number of years, sustainability has been a much greater focus of what our members do, and I'll come on to that later on. And this is just a visual kind of representation of that diversity. So on this slide, we see Women on Wheels in the top left-hand corner there in Govan Hill in Glasgow, and I'll speak a little bit about what they do later on as well. You can see a community-owned car club on the top right. Bottom left, we've got a scheduled community-owned bus service in Ayrshire. Bottom right, we have a volunteer car scheme helping people get to hospital appointments. And we also see a group of very happy kids being taken away on a trip. And so there are lots of day trip and social leisure sporting activities, which the sector is enabling as well, using minibuses and MPVs. And after tonight, you can take a look at our interactive community transport map of Scotland, which shows our over 180 operators across the country. We have a member in almost every local authority in the country, and you can filter by local authority on the map by type of service that they deliver, and find information about the types of projects they're running, contact information, and so on. So that's a really useful tool for getting the full breadth of the sector, um, from urban Glasgow to Orkney and everything in between. We often, I think, as a sector, get understood as being about rural transport. But actually, as you can see there on the top left, 44% of our operators are serving rural communities. So that's super important, particularly where there are places without any public transport options or with very, very few. However, the sector is also really important in urban and island areas as well. So over a third of our operators are in kind of built up, developed towns and cities. So that just shows that there are unmet transport needs that people can't fulfill either by private or public transport options right across Scotland, and it's not just a rural phenomenon. Often operators are delivering at quite a small scale. They're hyper-local services tailored to what local communities need. They really understand those local transport needs super well because they're embedded, they are one with the community. But actually, if you add up all of those operators together, the sector is a really important big player. So in 2022, there were over 800,000 passengers that were supported by community transport across Scotland. And that was using over 900 vehicles. Two-thirds of those are minibuses, so they are super important, particularly those that are adapted for accessibility purposes, either with ramps or tail lifts to make sure that wheelchair users can use them. But as I mentioned, and we'll come on to with examples, there are plenty of other modes that are used as well. And you can check out our More Than a Minibus report to dig into more of the detail and the data for the picture of the sector, the state of the sector north of the border. So to take two examples of what our sector looks like from different ends of the spectrum, Glennon District Volunteer Car Scheme are a kind of archetypal example of a very rural volunteer car scheme. They rely on volunteers using their own cars in rural Stirlingshire, primarily to help older and disabled people locally to access hospital appointments, but not just that. And they're often travelling quite long distances to get to specialist services at the nearest hospitals in Larbar and in Glasgow. So that's really a lifeline service for people who either can't afford to own and operate their own car or don't have family and friends locally who are able to help them with that, or just need a bit of support to live more independently and not have to rely on those people to help them out. They are focused on accessibility, so they recently managed to fundraise for a new accessible MPV, which helps out in addition to volunteers using their own cars. And that's super important because of the transport desert that they operate in. Very, very little bus service, no rail service, and quite far away from lots of these amenities and public services which people rely on. So that's a kind of example of a very hyper-local, low-budget, volunteer-led initiative that is super important. At the other end of the spectrum, we've got some of our members, including Glenfarr Community Transport, that are delivering scheduled, timetabled bus services that look and feel to the passenger like any other kind of bus service that might be delivered by First or Stagecoach or Lothian. The key difference being that it's run in the interests of the local community on a non-profit basis, and that kind of friendly face is at the heart of what they do. Glenfarg have managed to massively increase patronage numbers, as you can see at the bottom there, more than tenfold, increasing the number of people that use buses locally because they know what the local community needs and wants, and have been delivering just that for a couple of years now. And they've been kind of lauded in the press and been held up as a big positive example of what the sector can do. So how can community transport accelerate community-led climate action? Um, the first thing I think to say is to put this kind of within context, as I'm sure you're aware, that we do desperately need a different approach to the way that we're trying to reduce our transport emissions. As you can see on the yellow there, Scotland's carbon footprint from domestic transport is effectively unchanged since 1990. So despite the significant progress we've made in other areas, particularly our energy supply, moving to renewables, particularly to some extent waste management, as you can see at the top there in the purple. Um, we've we've basically not made any dent in our transport emissions since 1990, and that's largely because of increasing levels of private car ownership and use, and decreases in things like bus use. Um, and that's part of what you can see on this slide here. The Scottish Government, in addition to its net zero targets, has a target to reduce private car use, but we are, as it says there, severely off track. We got down to a kind of required level in kind of the first early stages of the pandemic, but it has bounced back since then with all of the problems for the environment that causes. We published this report to look at and kind of articulate how we think the sector can contribute to solving that big problem. So we set out the key different ways that our sector is delivering services which reduce carbon emissions, reduce private car use, give people more sustainable transport options, and help to deliver a just transition to net zero, which means that we don't leave anyone or any community behind. So, for example, we don't leave rural communities behind, we don't leave disabled people behind. We make sure that everyone has access to sustainable transport options in the future. And some really interesting findings from that research. Nearly 2/3 of our operators agreed that climate action was part of their mission. So we expected to find operators saying that they were primarily about accessibility or equality or tackling transport poverty. And although many of them did say that that was part of their mission, actually, they also saw the link into climate action and they saw the role that they had to play. That led to them taking climate action in different ways. So they were raising awareness of the problem, they were reducing their own emissions, they were switching to electric vehicles, and the sector is now up to 18% overall for its fleet over to electric. That's not just minibuses where the number is slightly lower, but that's across all different types of vehicle. But for those who can't move there yet, the key barriers are around funding, inevitably, given the cost of new electric vehicles, a lack of local charging infrastructure, particularly in more rural communities and island communities. It's just not feasible to switch at the moment, and rising costs for vehicles just in general. And those funding streams are available. It's very competitive. But there are other things that the groups can do short of switching their minibus or their bus or their car to electric. Women on Wheels are a fantastic example of that. They're a community cycling hub targeting women, particularly in Govanhill, which is Scotland's most diverse community, does struggle with issues of multiple deprivation, people not having access to cars, people also not even having access to bikes. And so they run lots of different projects, taster sessions, tours, maintenance classes, a bike lending library to help people to travel more actively and empower people to do that in a way that's confident and safe. They've had a massive impact locally and continue to grow. Another type of service, community-owned car clubs. There are private operators like Enterprise and others that operate across some parts of the country, but they tend to be in more urban or larger cities. Leap Car Club in Renfrewshire are delivering their own bespoke local service, which gives people all of the convenience of a car without the hassle and expense of owning one. The membership has been growing, and they're enabling people to only use a car when they really need to, maybe to avoid purchasing a second family car in the household, um, thinking about their car use, so maybe reducing how much they would otherwise use it, as well as the cars being electric, so that being a good thing for emissions too. And we're trying to support more operators looking at kind of copying that model across the country. Which brings me to the Community Transport Association and our role. We are a UK charity and a membership organisation. So, in addition to the 180 plus members that I mentioned across Scotland, we represent over 1,300 across the whole of the UK. We're a designated permit issuing body, which means that we can, for the vast majority of community transport services, we can make sure that folk are on the right side of the law, that they're complying with regulations, and they have the permits they need to operate. And we provide expert advice and support on that, but also a whole host of other things from recruiting volunteers to securing funding. And as I say, that's across the whole of the UK. We would try to support the sector as well as be a voice in campaigning. In Scotland, in addition to myself, I've got two colleagues, our development officers, Nicola and Lara, who do a lot of grassroots, external facing work trying to support local charities and community groups to set up new community transport schemes. And we do our best to get out and about around the country to support that work. So I suppose there's four key ways where we can hopefully help anyone in the room or online who is kind of interested or inspired by some of the examples that you're hearing about from across the country. We can provide that advice, guidance, and support to help groups come from idea or problem, develop it through to a project and a plan, and see it through to implementation and delivery on the ground. We also deliver training, so we can deliver bespoke intro to CT sessions to wider groups of people in the community or organisations to upskill them to understand the opportunities. We also have a UK-wide accredited, recognised minibus driver awareness scheme, which is all about safety and comfort in journeys, making sure that minibus drivers have the skills they need to deliver services properly. We also run lots of events, so we have our annual in-person conferences, but we're also delivering increasingly local networks to bring groups together, to provide peer support, to learn from each other, and we're planning more in-person events across the country as well. And again, we try to serve the whole of Scotland in doing that well beyond the Central Belt. And finally, we do a lot of policy research and campaign work to try and make sure that we advocate for individual operators where they need support, but also lobby for the kind of investment and the right legislation that the sector needs to survive and grow. But from your own perspective, how can you help in terms of community-led climate action and in the community transport space? Our operators that already exist are always looking for volunteers, whether that's people who might be able to drive a vehicle, whether that's a minibus or their own car, or volunteer in other ways. Maybe you're someone who could help them spruce up their website or fix a tech problem or become a trustee on their board and give your experience and expertise that way. They're also always looking for people to help spread the word, both to people who might be able to donate and volunteer, but also to users and passengers. There are always people out there in communities who aren't aware of the support that they could be accessing, and that's really important to get the word out there. So please do take a look at our map at that link to see if there's an operator already in your community or near to where you live. But beyond that, you could also look at considering setting up your own community transport service. If that's something which might interest you, please do get in touch with us in the first instance, and we can try to give you the support along that journey to make it happen. We are still, despite all the challenges out there, not going to say that it's necessarily easy. The funding environment is really challenging, but we're still seeing, with a bit of support and guidance from CTA, more and more communities set up community transport schemes. So it is doable, it is achievable, and we're seeing massive positive results across the country, both for planet, but also for people in place in the process. So please do get in touch if we can help at all for you to join that movement. So I'll stop there. Apologies if I have gone on for too long there, but if there are any other questions or anything you'd like to follow up on after the event, please do get in touch with the team and we'd be happy to help.